Immunotec is a company that was founded on research. The name of our company is actually Immunotec Research. Now, why is that? The research on Immunocal, our core product, began way back in 1975. Collaboration of Dr. Gustavo Buenos and Dr. Patricia Kongshaven, two McGill University professors. They collaborated. They had a few ideas that they were kicking around. And by 1978, they actually published the very first paper on Immunocal. Now, just for context, think about that for a minute. 1975, I'm a freshman in high school. Think where you were in 1975. 1978, I was a junior in high school. Think where you were in 1978. That's how far back this research goes. 1980, a gentleman comes along by the name of Dieter Beer, puts some money behind this project and behind this research. And what happens between 1980 and 1996, nobody was asleep at the wheel here. This product was in the research world. And I'll just mention two pieces of research by two very famous researchers. Dr. Luc Montagnier, who's still very, very involved running the Pasteur Institute over in Paris, did some research on the HIV virus, actually published a peer-reviewed article on that actually appears in a medical textbook used to this day to educate medical doctors on oxidative stress in both HIV and cancer. Okay, and also our good friend Dr. Wolf Droga, okay, was also working with this product up in Heidelberg, Germany, with the German Cancer Institute, and doing all sorts of research once again on Immunocal because of his relationship with Dr. Buenos and Dr. Kongshaven. Those were two researchers, and you know, we could go on and on and on about what happened between 1980 and 1996 because it was incredible to set the table for what would happen eventually in 1996. Was that there was a collaboration of three businessmen, Dieter Beer, who I mentioned, a gentleman by the name of Chuck Roberts, and a gentleman who's become not only a good friend, but somebody who has taught me so much about Immunocal, so much about athleticism and Immunocal, so much about nutrition and Immunocal, and really is the guy who has really been so instrumental in putting together these researchers around the world that he works with on a regular basis, that he has relationships with, and he's really been the beacon, if you will, of this research and taking what Dr. Buenos and Dr. Kongshaven started and taking it to market. In 1996, he was the third gentleman that joined that team and helped to make Immunotec Research a company. So at this point, it's my honor to turn the call over to my good friend who's going to be bringing on a very, very special guest, and that's my good friend, John Molson in Montreal. John, welcome to the call.
Thank you, John. I'd like to begin by thanking both John and Keith for putting this series of Zoom calls on, as it's given me a chance to share some of the work of our scientific partners over the years. You know, it's one thing to read the journal articles, but it's something completely different hearing it from them directly. And when we formed Immunotec and launched the business in 1997, I was at the tail end of my competitive career in sports. I spent many hours sharing ideas with Dr. Buenos on the subject of high-performance sports, particularly how I felt as an athlete when I first started on the product. This was something he developed a keen interest in. He said to me one day after he thought about it for a long time, as AIDS is a model of immune deficiency, the athlete is a model for the healthy adult. During the ensuing years, we completed 2 clinical trials in 2 separate age groups using 2 different models of exercise, with both resulting in clinically significant gains in performance. We submitted the data to Health Canada and obtained a health claim on performance for Immunocal. We were laying the scientific groundwork to be able to talk to and collaborate with the top scientific minds in the areas of high-performance sports. When I received the first contact from our next speaker many years ago, inquiring about Dr. Droge's work, we were ready. Again, little did I know at the time how important this relationship would become. But all I can say is how fortunate we are to have him here with us today, sharing his wisdom on the use of Immunocal in high-performance sports. Dr. Nathan Lewis is the lead performance nutrition scientist at the English Institute of Sports. He's a clinical and performance nutrition scientist for ORRECO since its inception 11 years ago. He's an invited research fellow at St. Mary's University, and he's a member of our scientific advisory board. Nathan began his career as a clinical dietitian specializing in intensive care medicine, and then moved full-time into elite sport after being headhunted by the English Institute of Sports. Nathan currently works as the lead performance nutrition scientist for the English Institute of Sport, having worked as a senior performance nutritionist for the EIS for several Olympic cycles, including Beijing, London, Rio, and now the fourth, Tokyo. Nathan has delivered nutritional programs to optimize health and performance to many athletes over the years, including world, Olympic, and European medalists across a spectrum of Olympic sports. Outside of Olympic sports, Nathan has experienced consulting to professional teams in the English Premier League, PGA, NBA, NHL, and MLB through his role as the lead performance and clinical nutritionist and scientist at the sports and science data analytics company, ORRECO. His research to date is focused on biomarkers, oxidative stress in elite endurance athletes, and unexplained underperformance syndrome, or what's commonly known as overtraining syndrome. He's published papers in peer-reviewed sports medicine journals, science journals, and collaborated on various book chapters in the field of sports nutrition and exercise science. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Nathan Lewis to the call.
Hello, John. Hiya. How are you?
It's such a privilege for me, and you know what's so exciting for me is I've been working with you, and Dr. Gutman's been working with you, Immunotec's been working with you for over 10 years, and we've seen what's been going on behind the scenes for 10 years, and now we get to share it with everybody on the call. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for you to share how Immunocal has acted, you know, based on what you've seen in our clinical data, but more importantly, what you've seen practically and how these athletes responded, and how you've used Immunocal as a tool in terms of these high-performance athletes. So as part of this, I'd like you to also share with the audience what exactly is the English Institute of Sport and what exactly is ORRECO in terms of giving a little history and what they do to give some context to these athletes and the setting that you're working in.
Sure. No, I'm happy to do that, John. Yeah, so the English Institute of Sport is now a rather large organisation that has training centres dotted throughout the UK. It provides sports medicine, sports science services to elite level athletes through national training programs. So athletes come and base themselves at the centre. It's an athlete focused, coach-led program with all the various sciences wrapped around that. There's also an internal research and development program which we operate as well. And the Institute of Sport has been up and running since, I think, 2004 now. And certainly, I think no one would dispute that the successes that Team GB has had in the last several Olympic Games are down to the sports medicine and sports science and coaching and support that sort of comes through UK Sport and the English Institute of Sport. So yeah, I'm very proud to be part of that system, definitely. And it's allowed me to travel for a few Olympic Games myself, and you know, go out to Rio, go out to Beijing, and fingers crossed, hopefully I get to Tokyo next year, which you know, disappointed it wasn't happening this summer, but excited that it could still be happening next year.
Yeah, and if my memory serves me correctly, that first call you gave us over 10 years ago was for some Olympic level sailors that you wanted to put on the program, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I love reflecting on that moment when you and Jimmy came to meet myself and the head of sports science and medicine of British Olympic Sailing down on the south coast around the time of the Beijing Olympic Games, and that team is still the most successful Olympic sailing team in history, winning 6 medals out of a possible 11, of which 4 were gold. And yeah, we were looking for a product that could really support the athletes, the sailors' health, because with long hours on the water, then coming in, spending long hours in the gym as well. So they've got to develop the technical skills on the water and then all the physical qualities in the gym as well. Training is pretty hard for those guys. You know, most people think, you know, what, sailors, really? Is it that hard? You know, it is. It's not just gin and tonics and sunshine. So yeah.
And then through the evolution, I remember the Hogden Moore was formed, and then from Hogden Moore we formed ORRECO. And so maybe you can explain what ORRECO does, and the most recent arrangement you have with the NBA PA Association.
Yeah, of course. So ORRECO, as we pronounce it, so it's sort of broken up as OR recovery. So OR is Irish for gold, so it's gold recovery. And the two founders, Dr. Brian Moore, is a PhD in hematology, so his expertise was biomarkers, and he'd been working within the English Institute of Sport set up for a good number of years. So that's how I knew him. We'd worked together for quite a period of time. And then the other founder was Dr. Andy Hodgson, who's a consultant hematologist. So the company was very much founded with expertise in biomarkers, and then I was brought on as the first scientist and practitioner in 2010. And essentially the company is built, operates around providing biomarker services to athletes, but it's much more than that. We have a team of sort of mathematicians, so there's a lot of data analysis and bioanalytics. We use software to deliver our systems to coaches and athletes, and I'll touch a little bit more on it throughout the presentation. But yeah, I mean, when I put up some of the slides and you see some of the franchises and brands and teams that ORRECO is now working with, it's you have to pinch yourself now and again to say, is this real? Yeah,
it was a dream for me and the company to see our product being used in these these elite segments of sport. And so let's get started and learn how you use it with these different sports and different athletes.
Great, sounds good, John. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm going to turn off my camera. It's 7 p.m. in the evening here, so it's going to get dark and the light's going to change. If you hear, you may hear in the background occasionally my young son, so apologies for that. But just in case you hear some child noise in the background, it's him near bedtime. So I'm going to stop my video and I'm going to look to share my screen, and we can get started. Give us a few minutes here to it does say here just host disabled attendee screen sharing, so I don't know if I can be given access just temporarily to share my screen here. If I can't, then if you make me a host.
We're going to take care of you here, so just a second.
Thanks, Keith.
So okay, you can now share your screen.
Fantastic. Let's get that on there. It's just loading up the okay. So, is everyone seeing a slide that says insights into the use of Immunocal in elite sport?
Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. Let's get going. So I wanted to give you a bit more of an introduction to ORRECO. And so I've just got a couple of slides that have been put together by one or two of my colleagues in ORRECO for me. So, to read off the slide, but it really gives you a lot more context. Everything we do is about helping the best athletes on the planet be ready to perform. So we do this through analyzing biomarkers in the blood that drive performance. Using advanced machine learning, we match this with an athlete's physical load, their travel load, their sleep data, and their performance data to provide personalized training, nutrition, and recovery strategies that have been proven to help players. So ultimately, it's about allowing players to better tolerate the physical demands of their training environment and game environment. Critical is reducing days lost to injury and illness, and we'll elaborate a lot more on that. Helping them sustain performance through better continuity with regards to training, and of course looking to prolong careers as well. I'm sure we can all think of elite athletes that unfortunately their careers have been cut short through injuries. And there's some nice quotes that we've got here. So rather than me sort of saying what the company is good at, it's always nice when our clients are happy to provide some feedback We've got Chelsea Lane here from the Atlanta Hawks saying, I selected ORRECO as their world leaders in bioanalytics. They possess unrivaled expertise in interpreting biomarker data. We have Dawn Scott from the USA Women's National Soccer Team, so World Cup winners, saying ORRECO is an integral part of their World Cup preparations. We've got a team doctor in the English Premier League thanking us for reducing injury incidents. And we've got Casey Smith over at the Dallas Mavericks saying through working with us, he had 100% availability from an illness perspective. And then which we'll talk about as well. And the last comment is, thank you for bringing back a former world champion from severe fatigue. And some of my research is sort of focused around overtraining syndrome, or what we have referred to over this side of the pond as unexplained underperformance syndrome. So let's get into things. I wanted to start just by sort of touching on the science. So, you know, as a scientist, it's a proportion of my time is spent diving into the literature, the medical literature, the scientific literature, and I'm looking for research studies which will help us find an edge. And I'm looking for research studies that are conducted with a high degree of quality and a low risk of bias. So ideally, we're looking for randomized controlled trials, and then of course, if there's enough of the RCTs, then maybe some systematic reviews and meta-analyses have been published. So as this paper by Lanz back in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 1999 that really caught my attention. I didn't discover the paper till around the time of the Beijing Olympics, but I'm glad I did, because it was through this work that sort of prompted me to get in touch with Immunotec, and in turn, you know, start my relationship with Jimmy and John, and are using Immunocal for the last decade. So that high quality evidence is really important for us in ORRECO and in the English Institute of Sport. I guess it would be sort of remiss of me to start any presentation on nutritional supplements without just giving this caveat. So you will see two logos down in the bottom left, Informed Sport and Informed Choice. So you will see them on products that have gone through rigorous testing in an independent laboratory. And that testing is to test the product to ensure that it does not contain any substances, which often is hormones, that may result in an athlete inadvertently failing a doping test. Unfortunately, there are a number of athletes out there that have fallen foul of taking nutritional supplements that haven't been tested, and it's cost them a ban. And this, on the right-hand side of the slide, as I look at it, there's an IOC-sponsored study here that was carried out quite a good few years ago now, back in 2002. But it really opened the world's eyes to the risk of just walking into a shop, purchasing a product off the shelf or purchasing a product off the internet. So out of 634 samples that they analyzed, 15% of those contained anabolic androgenic steroids not declared on the label, and there was a further 10% that data was unclear. So certainly 15%, maybe as much as 25%. So, you know, that's, you know, 1 in 6 to sort of 1 in 4. You know, there's a degree of risk there, isn't there? And you can see that those nutritional products were obtained from a variety of different countries around the globe. So for us in elite sport, we'll only work and use products that are of very high quality and have been through appropriate testing to ensure that we've got confidence in their use. And certainly Immunocal has been tested now through Informed Sport and Informed Choice for a good number of years, and we've been using it for over a decade. So very pleased with the product. I thought we'd give some definitions for those who aren't as familiar with some of the terminology, because we will dip into some of the science. So you'll hear me talking a little bit about oxidative stress. So this was first defined going back to 1985. We got a nice simple definition by Professor Sears, a disturbance in the pro-antioxidant balance in favor of the former, so in favor of the pro-oxidants. And you can see this seesaw visual in front of you, the blue triangle, and we have pro-oxidants and antioxidants, and there's always a balance. The body's always going to try and bring it back and restore homeostasis and achieve a balance between the two. What we've learned through a lot of research carried out over the last 25 years, 30 years, is it's a lot more complicated than we originally thought. So reactive oxygen species, what used to be referred to as free radicals, were primarily thought as being just harmful molecules. that they cause cell damage and they didn't do any good. What we've now grown to understand is actually they act as signaling molecules. So they play a really, really important role within the cell and between organs and systems. They can act to switch on certain genes that code for certain proteins. And then through switching on those genes, we can build new proteins and the cell can adapt to the stimulus. So with exercise, we see an increase in reactive oxygen species. It's an acute increase. Once the exercise is discontinued, that burst of reactive oxygen species settles down. But in the meantime, they've switched on a lot of genes that are helping the body adapt and improve, physiologically speaking, to the exercise. One of the key adaptations is increases in antioxidant enzymes. So you can read more about oxidative stress, which we've sort of retitled as alterations in redox homeostasis in this paper published in Sports Medicine. So this was putting together 30 years worth of research. Myself and a few colleagues, we reviewed every single paper and pulled it together and wrote this paper up, which really sort of summarizes really everything to date quite nicely in that space. But I think what this slide probably is conveying, or at least I hope it's conveying, is this balance between pro-oxidant and antioxidant can be quite complex. There's a lot of factors, as you can see, that are influencing this. So, first and foremost, you can see training on both sides of the equation. As I touched upon, training produces an increase in reactive oxygen species. If there's a nice balance between the training load and recovery, we then get a nice upregulation in antioxidant systems. Injury and illness, by contrast, we get big spikes in oxidative stress, large increases in reactive oxygen species. And this is certainly in the context of injury, the body or the white blood cells use these reactive oxygen species to target the virus or the bacteria. But invariably there's some collateral damage that can come about. So we use some of our monitoring, which I'll touch upon to capture information around that. I've highlighted in green sleep loss and psychological stress because they're not as well known as being disturbances in oxidative stress. So for example, there's some nice research in law students showing quite marked increase in oxidative stress undergoing exams. So, take the exercise equation out of it, psychological stress itself can cause quite a marked increase in reactive oxygen species and cause a disturbance in this pro-antioxidant balance. And sleep is pivotal. So large disturbances in sleep increase inflammation, stress hormones, and they'll give rise to oxidative stress. And that's most likely through disturbances in melatonin metabolism. So as you can see, complex area, a lot of things going on, but through monitoring the athlete closely, looking at their blood work, we can make more informed decisions about what's happening with the athlete, which physiological systems are being disturbed, and what interventions are most appropriate at a particular point in time. So my kind of sort of final slide really on the concept of oxidative stress and redox physiology. So this is just trying to put together a nice visual around hormesis. Hormesis is a term that is being increasingly applied in the field of redox biology and oxidative stress. It's taken from toxicology, or world of pharmacology and toxicology, where a sort of small dose of something may stimulate adaptation or a stress response, whereas a large dose can cause harm or indeed maladaptation. An obvious example might be something like alcohol, where a small dose can have some beneficial health effects, but clearly a large dose can be quite detrimental. So what I'm trying to convey in this schematic really is that you've got the blue arrows, one along the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, showing the degree of oxidative stress, and then we've got improvements in physiological function as we move up the vertical axis. And as you track up through, follow this red line, this curve, starting from a detrained state up to optimum performance. Yes, there's increases in oxidative stress, but we're seeing the athlete upregulate their antioxidant systems. They're adapting, they're improving their performance, okay? But if there's a gross imbalance between training load and recovery, or indeed maybe on top of the training, there's some superimposed stress, a relationship breakup, an illness, some financial worries, whatever it may be, exams, if it's a very young athlete that's trying to balance university life, that may start to tip the balance. And oxidative stress may continue to increase, driving the athlete down into this sort of more maladaptive state. And on the way, we may see increases in inflammation and disruption of mitochondrial function. And of course, right at the bottom of the curve, I put this image there to denote chronic disease. Because yes, in chronic disease, we see oxidative stress. Of course we do. It's part of the pathophysiology. But the difference between exercise, where we get an acute short-term increase in oxidative stress, is with chronic disease, we've got permanently elevated levels of reactive oxygen species, okay, that are being switched on and being produced continually, and there's overwhelming the body's systems. So it's not adapting. We're seeing increases in inflammation, and in fact, if you've got persistent oxidative stress, it can switch on and increase inflammation quite notably. So that's me on redox biology. So let's get a bit more into the sort of applied side, which gives you a bit more insight into what I do with ORRECO and English Institute of Sport, and how I've used Immunocal over the years. So what you're looking at on this slide is, firstly in the bottom corner, you'll see this picture of the road. And we use this with coaches to try and help them understand how ORRECO operates to a degree, in the sense that the athlete is on a journey. So at the start of every season, the training gets mapped out. We sit down and we look at the season. Every coach, scientist will do that in their respective sports. They'll know where the key competitions are. They'll know where they might be going away for training camps. So then we will put in place blood tests, which, on using this diagram and this analogy here, are the street lights. So as we go down this road. And then more frequently, we may have the cat's eyes on the road, which is the week-to-week oxidative stress and inflammation. And alongside of that as well, we'll have collection of more sort of subjective data around how the athlete is feeling. We'll be recording, say, how happy they are on a scale, fatigue levels, and sleep patterns. And all of that data is aggregated together and used to make decisions around athlete well-being. What you're looking at as well is a screenshot of an iPad, and on there is some of our proprietary software. So this is just one example of how we might monitor oxidative stress. So you can see a purple line, and that's our marker of oxidative damage. And then you can see a blue line, which is our marker of antioxidant defense. And they're being measured in the athlete. And then we've got these dashed lines that you're seeing. And that's where ideally we want the athlete to operate. So through some mathematical calculations, we're able to state with a high degree of confidence, where the athlete should be operating from a perspective of oxidative stress. And as they move outside those lines, there's a greater probability of injury and illness. And so that will be fed back to coach and athlete to help them stay on track and on plan. There's some of our research papers there, which you can dig into a bit more around some of this research that we've been pioneering now for a good number of years. So it's important to recognize that, yes, we can increase glutathione through using products such as Immunocal, very effective in doing so, but we can also increase glutathione through exercise. And as I highlighted, that's one of the key adaptations that comes with exercise training. So I just wanted to demonstrate that for you nice and neatly with this particular study. You've got two figures in front of you, and you can see the clear white boxes pre-training, and then you've got the hash boxes denoting post-training. And then we've got glutathione being measured. And you can see that there's a nice increase, whether it's aerobic training, whether it's circuit training, or whether it's a combination of the two. All of those three different training programs in this particular study nicely increase glutathione. Just to, I guess, to sort of reinforce the point, there's some research down below in the blue boxes. So this is a different enzyme, but also involved in metabolizing reactive oxygen species. It's called superoxide dismutase. And you can see different concentrations based on different sports. So these athletes were sampled in these different sports. So, and it's interesting because what you see is swimmers is low volume and low impact. So the training stress isn't as great as, say, someone like triathletes right at the other end of the spectrum, where you've got high volume very high volume, running, cycling, swimming, and you've also got the impact that comes with running. And that results in higher levels still of this particular antioxidant enzyme. So even though we know training influences it, the nature of the training, certainly in a high-level athletes, can influence the expression of these enzymes. And we will track these enzymes and measure them in athletes to give us an understanding of how they're adapting. And of course, we put a lot of weight on measuring glutathione, particularly because we know we can target that directly through using Immunocal. Immunocal, it's not just about functioning as an antioxidant. The product does increase glutathione very effectively, but it also is able to favorably modulate and support the immune system. As John was talking about at the beginning of the call, the research extends back several decades. You know, you've got some fantastic immunologists and academics that have done research in this space many, many years ago. And there are very, very few products you'll find on the market that have the level of research underpinning them. And this is what so excited me when I first came across Immunotec and met with John and Jimmy. So we've got immunomodulators. So Immunocal, of course, these proteins are not denatured. So they're intact. So when the whey is extracted from milk, many other generic whey proteins are not denatured, and you see destruction of these immune modulators. That's not the case with Immunocal. But also, of course, it provides a full complement of amino acids. So not just the high cysteine content for boosting glutathione, but look, you can see in the blue chart there, high levels of leucine, one of the branched chain amino acids that's so crucial for switching on muscle protein synthesis. So, and this really leads me on to my next slide quite nicely, which I do often get asked, well, Immunocal or NAC, because we can aggressively increase glutathione through using NAC. So does Immunocal offer anything more? And I think it does. I think in part, as I've just highlighted, it's a source of amino acids. So not only can we target the glutathione and the antioxidant system, I can provide a full complement of all the essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids to the athlete as well, which is integral really in allowing tissue to remodel and repair. And as we'll come to, athletes have much higher protein requirements than the general population. What you're also seeing here is 2 studies that showed a negative outcome from using NAC. So NAC altered substrate metabolism in some elite cyclists, reduced mean power output by around 5%, which is a huge margin. And then you've also got another study that wanted to really explore the effect of NAC on skeletal muscle remodeling and repair after extensive muscle damage. And it showed the muscle did not remodel and repair fully using NAC versus the placebo. So there was better muscle recovery over, I think it was 10 days with the placebo than there was with NAC. So NAC comes with a downside in my view, or certainly a potential for one. Immunocal is much more complementary to the athlete's recovery. So how do we use Immunocal in elite sport? Probably what you've all been waiting for. So we get here eventually. So yeah, excuse my preamble to bring us to this point. But you know, I am going to focus on how we use it in elite sport. But what I'm talking about is absolutely applicable to the recreational athlete. You know, and we could perhaps argue more so because perhaps the recreational athlete is more prone to training errors. They're unlikely to have a world-class coach supporting them. They're more likely to be juggling working life because they're not earning a living from their sport. They may well be juggling family, work life. They could even be studying alongside and trying to fit all their sport work in and around that. That's a lot. And clearly Immunocal is going to help them adapt to that stress and help keep them on the road. So, you know, just because I'm talking about elite athletes doesn't mean this doesn't have strong application to the recreation athlete. In many ways it does, if not more so. So I've taken some quotes here from one of my papers, which I'll reference in a second because we've got a couple of slides on prevention of injury and illness. So this is pivotal. You know, any practitioner, any scientist working in elite sport is going to be looking to prevent injuries and illness. Because if you're not healthy, you can't train. And if you can't train, you can't compete. And no one wants to see all that talent sitting on the bench, you know, not able to go to Olympic Games, not able to compete in a World Cup, or a Super Bowl, whatever it may be. So there is a good body of research showing loss of training time due to illness and injury is a major determinant of performance goal success or failure. And indeed, every time I read these statistics in the last paragraph, it never ceases to amaze me. So this was unpublished data till I sort of put it out there in one of our papers. But the UK Sport and English Institute of Sport, as I alluded to, would carry out research, most of which doesn't get published. But in the 12 months prior to the Rio Olympics, there were 108,000 days, training days lost to injury and 17,173 training days lost to illness as a result of 4,685 separate injury or illness incidents experienced by just over 1,000 athletes across 38 sports. That's a lot of days of injury and illness. So clearly for us, this is a big priority. So I set about with some colleagues carrying out some research because no one had done any, or certainly published any, that was showing, look, is there clear evidence of increased oxidative stress in athletes when they're ill and when they're injured? Because we know that they've got highly efficient, upregulated antioxidant systems as a result of years and years of training. But do we still see a significant increase in oxidative stress? And in short, we do. You've got two figures presented in front of you here. Some nice p-values with moderate to large effect sizes, as you can see from the Cohen's D values placed on the figure. So you can read this paper if you want to explore and understand a little bit more around the role of oxidative stress in injury and illness. Clearly with monitoring athletes, we want to be able to intervene before the injury or illness presents. And we have a good idea of what factors constitute increasing that risk, nutrition being a big one. But if it were unfortunate that the athlete encounters an injury or indeed an illness, through what we've noted as well through measuring oxidative stress is we get this big spike. So we can use our monitoring process as well to see when the illness or the injury is starting to resolve. And particularly with illness, we see symptoms recover quite quickly, but the oxidative stress can often persist. And that can help guide our decisions around how quickly an athlete may return to high intensity training. But we'll be using Immunocal in a targeted approach. So I like to use it in a targeted way because I want athletes to be compliant and I don't want athletes to get taste fatigue. So in some instances, the illness prone athlete, I'm going to put them on Immunocal all year round. You might ask, what's illness prone? Or give me some numbers to allow me to define that. So if you look into the research, generally 3 to 4 infections a year is classified as sort of illness prone. So if we have an athlete that is unfortunate enough that they're picking up frequent illnesses, invariably we know that there's quite often the nutrition needs addressing, and Immunocal can be a good way of sort of bolstering that recovery. Recovery and adaptation. So athletes work through various training phases, right? The training load is progressed because we want to allow them to get fitter. If we didn't change the training load, they wouldn't improve. So we've got to keep pushing them. And as they go through different training phases, there's also periods of really high workload, which are then invariably coupled with a bit of a deload to allow them to supercompensate and recover and get the increases in performance. What the research has shown us over the last decade is increasing protein intake during periods of high training load is hugely advantageous to the athlete. So these are really quite high protein intakes as well, which you might find surprising. So, if we look at some of the research, a non-athlete, you're going to be looking to consume around about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. The endurance athlete, the research will suggest 1.6 grams per kilogram protein, gram of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So doubling for the endurance athlete. Strength or power athletes will be a little bit higher again. What we've learned now is for these really intense training periods, we can be taking up to 2.2, 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And indeed, the bottom study was as high as 3 grams. So really increasing the protein intake around really heavy training periods just gets on top of the remodeling and the repair. It provides the building blocks, which I touched upon that Immunocal has. It's a protein. So it's got all those respective amino acids. It provides the additional building blocks as and when the athlete needs them. If you give extra protein when it's not needed, it's just metabolic waste and it gets peed out. But when the extra demand is there, particularly physically, but also psychologically, the body can utilize that protein. And what you also see on the slide is just a nice simple graphic just showing you that how the day might be structured. So 8 a.m. protein feed, 11 a.m. after training, recovery snack based around whey protein, 1 p.m. lunch, 4 p.m. another snack protein based after training, dinner time. Then in some athletes will be a third training session, then snack before bed, get up, do the same thing again. Very disciplined, very structured. In some instances and in many instances, the athlete is not eating because they're hungry, they're eating to a structured program, just as they're training to a structured program. The photo there is of Font-Romeu. So this is an altitude training camp that every year for the last 13 years I've gone out to with one of the sports I work very closely with. Unfortunately, we didn't make it there this summer for obvious reasons. But what you can see at altitude is a loss of appetite. And actually you can see that even at in intense periods of training at sea level as well. So it's important that the athletes are given structure and they're advised accordingly, because if you just rely on appetite, it's unlikely they're going to be able to meet those increased demands. The professional sports that ORRECO works with, so we've got some nice examples here. So we've got Tottenham Hotspur. So Immunocal sits in their supplement cupboard, which they use with targeted athletes based around biomarkers and recovery. So that's the Premier League. Artemis, so World Cup sailing. The head of sports science and medicine used Immunocal for the America's Cup. And indeed, he had a couple of illness-prone sailors that used Immunocal. And I also used it for the Olympics in Rio as well, which I believe one of them won an Olympic gold. You've got NBA basketball, where we've used it, and pro golf as well. So not the physical demands that you see in the other sports with pro golf, but there's a lot of travel there. And anyone who's ever played golf to a decent level knows that it can be quite stressful. You know, there's a lot of time to think, which for some people may be an advantage, for others it may be a disadvantage. So our poor golfers are doing a lot of travel, even if it is first class. You'd be surprised they can get do pick up quite a lot of can pick up quite a lot of infections. And John alluded to an area, and this is an area that I focused some of my research. We set up a clinic around the time I was doing my PhD in London, and we contacted doctors around the UK sports system and said, look, if you've got athletes that you diagnose with unexplained underperformance syndrome, refer them into us. So what is UPS? You know, John alluded to it, is essentially is overtraining syndrome. We call it unexplained underperformance syndrome for a number of reasons, but primarily, and the term was coined by a doctor who's himself an ex-athlete who went on to be a medical doctor within the British Olympic setup. And he felt in his experience, and I would agree with him in my experience, that overtraining syndrome suggests that the error or the cause of the presentation is down to the training. And that can really quite adversely affect the relationship between coach and athlete, because the athlete may look at that and go, you give me a diagnosis of overtraining syndrome. I am knackered. I don't have the motivation to get up in the morning. I feel pretty depressed at this point in time. I'm way, way short on what I should be doing training wise, and performance is just, you know, the numbers along are grossly disappointing. And these are the kind of features you have with the condition. It can be very debilitating for athletes. It has finished careers, and some athletes don't bounce back, which is why we were really keen to get into this space and provide some support. And we published some work around that. There's a review paper that is open access that you can go and read, entitled "Can Clinicians and Scientists Explain and Prevent Unexplained Underperformance Syndrome?" and that will tell you a lot more. But for us, in our experience, it's rarely the training per se that tips the balance. Yes, the athlete has been training very hard as an elite level athlete, but in a large proportion of these athletes, it's an infection, a prior illness that has tipped the balance. Maybe they've tried to get back and train too hard, too quickly, too fast, because they're worried, you know, I've missed 3 weeks from illness. I've got to catch this up. I've got to make this up. Athletes, you know, they're like racehorses in respect that they always want to do more. It's rare to find an athlete that wants to do less, and that's what, you know, helps them get them to the top of the tree, is their work ethic along with their talent. So yeah, the psychological stress as well, that can be a tipping point, particularly for the younger athlete who may be juggling exams. And indeed, you know, relationships can sometimes hit them harder as well. So what you're looking at over on the left-hand slide is a published case study. So we put this out there. We wanted to show the world that we use Immunocal to help support athletes back from overtraining syndrome. So that's where the photo is of this particular elite level athlete. She was a world-class rower. She was diagnosed with overtraining syndrome. She hadn't had a great world championships, so that performance preyed on her mind going into the winter. In order to try and improve and push on, the coach did increase the training load. So she was doing more resistance training. And then coupled with that, she picked up quite a nasty infection in the winter. So these three elements came together to really present with this unexplained underperformance syndrome. Eventually, we got her back. Our work is very much focused around targeting the antioxidant system and inflammation. That's what we do through nutrition. We then assist the athlete with advice around sleep patterns as well, because it's so important for facilitating repair, and work with the coaches and their scientists on the ground around monitoring the training and bringing the athlete back. I've just highlighted with the red square there, you can see, it gives some insight to how we restructured the nutrition. Clearly, vegetable serves was greatly increased, fruit serves was increased, nuts, seeds, and then protein was increased with Immunocal being added in. And you can see on the dietary analysis that some of these nutrient levels were much higher as a result. So though you can learn much more about some of the work that we've done around UPS there. And it was basically down to the fact that this athlete was, you know, she was quite happy for us to put this in print and put it out there, because she knew how debilitating the condition was. And when you sit down, and I've interviewed her afterwards, you know, she said, you know, in the time, I couldn't see the wood for the trees. I didn't know I had it. I didn't, you know, because it creeps up slow and insidious. It doesn't happen overnight. The athlete doesn't wake up and go, I've got ups. You know, it gradually creeps up. And once she was fully recovered, she could reflect back on that period and knew that things weren't right. And then my final slide, really, just to sort of touch upon this area, because I think this is an exciting area. We had a conference in Montreal, Immunotec did a few years ago, and brought all their scientists together. Dan presented some of this work. So Dan's published a number of papers in around glutathione, and this particular paper is looking at using Immunocal from a preventative perspective, so giving it prior to the traumatic brain injury, and then looking at the effects on cognition and histopathological indices of TBI, so the effect on the actual tissue itself, degree of recovery. So I think, you know, we've all seen the movie with Will Smith. It's now become sort of common knowledge, really, about the impact of concussions in NFL, and we're learning more as well about football, which is a game, you know, played all around the globe. You know, who would think that something as fundamental as heading the ball, you know, could over time give rise to some mental health issues down the road. So I think this is an area that we're going to see more research, we're going to learn more, and hopefully with learning more, we're going to be able to do more and protect our athletes. And that's it from me. So yeah, it gives me the opportunity to say thanks to the audience. And yeah, if you're interested, you can learn more about ORRECO there. Obviously we're on LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm afraid I'm not big on social media. I only generally tweet when I've got a paper to publish, something of that nature. I don't have enough time to get engrossed in social media. So yeah, thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed it.